Imagine a haunted portrait that screams in the dead of night, echoing through the misty halls of Blackthorn Manor, where Sir Reginald Hawthorne meets a chilling end poisoned, his face frozen in terror. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming sleuth, unraveling a tangled web of family secrets, a gambler's desperate debts, an artist's hidden forgeries, a doctor's forbidden love, and a widow's shocking betrayal. But wait, the screams aren't from the grave. They're a mechanical trap, rigged to frame the innocent and hide the true killer. What if the real twist isn't the curse, but the one person you'd never suspect pulling the strings? Stay tuned as the echoes reveal a deadly game of inheritance and revenge that will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The whisper of canvas. In the serene yet subtly ominous folds of Devonshire's countryside lay the village of Eldridge Hollow, a place where time seemed to linger like morning mist over the hedgerows. The village was small, comprising no more than a cluster of thatched cottages, a modest church with a lopsided steeple, and a single inn called the Fox and Hound, where locals gathered to exchange tales over pints of cider. It was the kind of English village that outsiders romanticized, peaceful, unchanging, with lanes bordered by wildflowers in summer and blanketed by frost in winter. But beneath this picturesque facade simmered the undercurrents of human folly, ambition, and fear, much as one might find in any corner of the world where people lived in close proximity, dominating the landscape. Perched on a gentle rise overlooking the hollow stood Blackthorn Manor. The house was an architectural relic of the Georgian era, its stone facade weathered by centuries of rain and wind, cloaked in thick ivy that clung like possessive fingers. Tall chimneys pierced the sky, and mullioned windows gazed out like watchful eyes. The manor had been in the Hawthorne family for generations, passed down through lines of eccentric landowners who dabbled in everything from botany to alchemy. The current master, Sir Reginald Hawthorne, was no exception to this lineage of peculiarities. A man in his late 60s, tall and gaunt with a shock of white hair that refused to be tamed. Sir Reginald had devoted his life to the acquisition of art. His collection was renowned among connoisseurs, though few ever saw it, for he guarded it jealously within the manor's dimly lit galleries. Sir Reginald's passion for paintings bordered on obsession. He had travelled the world in his youth, India, Egypt, the salons of Paris, amassing canvases that depicted everything from serene landscapes to brooding portraits. But none held his fascination like the portrait of Lady Eliza Hawthorne, his great-grandmother. Painted in 1850 by a now-forgotten artist named Edmund Blackwood, it captured Lady Eliza in her prime, a woman of striking beauty, with raven hair, piled high, piercing blue eyes, and a faint, enigmatic smile that seemed to hint at secrets unspoken. The painting hung in the manor's grand gallery, a vast room with high ceilings and walls lined with other treasures. But Lady Eliza's likeness commanded attention, as if it were the heart of the house itself. Whispers about the painting had circulated in Eldridge Hollow for as long as anyone could remember. It was said that on certain nights, particularly those without a moon, when darkness enveloped the manor like a shroud, the portrait emitted a scream, not a mere creak of wood or howl of wind, but a human cry, shrill and desperate, as though Lady Eliza herself were trapped within the canvas, pleading for release. Villagers spoke of it in hushed tones at the Fox and Hound. Old Mrs. Wilkins, the postmistress, claimed her grandfather had heard it as a boy, back when the manor hosted lavish balls. It chilled the blood, she would say, her eyes widening behind spectacles, like a soul in torment. Sir Reginald, however, scoffed at such superstitions. Poppycock, he would declare to any guest bold enough to inquire. The imaginings of idle minds, the house settles, the wind whistles through cracks, that's all. Yet, those who knew him well noticed a flicker in his eyes when the subject arose, a momentary hesitation that suggested even he harbored doubts. His wife, Lady Beatrice, a graceful woman of 50 with silver-streaked hair and a composure honed by years of society life, never commented on the legend. She busied herself with the gardens, tending roses that bloomed blood-red against the manor's grey stones. The household at Blackthorn Manor was a small but intricate web of relationships. There was Victor Hawthorne, Sir Reginald's nephew, a man in his 30s with a charming smile that masked a penchant for gambling. Victor had arrived unannounced 6 months prior, claiming a need for country air after a string of misfortunes in London. His visits to the village grew frequent, where he regaled locals with tales of high-stakes card games, though his pockets often ran empty. Then there was Clara Hawthorne, Sir Reginald's niece, a young woman of 25 with artistic aspirations. She spent her days in the attic studio, daubing canvases with bold strokes that Sir Reginald deemed modern nonsense. Clara's eyes, inherited from the Hawthorne line, mirrored those of Lady Eliza Sharp and knowing. Completing the inner circle was Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, a widower in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a habit of fidgeting. With his spectacles, Dr. Thorne lived in a cottage on the estate grounds. He attended to Sir Reginald's occasional ailments, touch of gout, a persistent cough, and dined at the manor most evenings. His presence was a comfort, though some villagers murmured about his unexplained absences. Trips to nearby towns that left his surgery shut a dot on a crisp autumn evening. As leaves rustled like whispers outside the windows, Sir Reginald hosted a rare dinner for his family and Dr. Thorne. The dining room glowed under candlelight, silverware gleaming on a table laden with roast pheasant and claret. Conversation flowed lightly at first, touching on the harvest festival in the village and the latest London exhibitions. But inevitably, as the port was poured, the topic turned to the portrait. "Uncle," Clara ventured, her fork pausing mid-air, "have you ever considered having Lady Eliza's painting restored? The colours are fading in places." Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. Restored? By whom? Some hack with no appreciation for Blackwood's technique. "No, my dear, it stays as it is. Besides, it's more than a mere picturite's family history." Victor leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass. "History with a voice, if the tales are true. Come now, uncle, you've heard the screams yourself, haven't you?" A silence fell. Lady Beatrice glanced at her husband, her napkin folded precisely in her lap. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. "Superstitions can play tricks on the mind, Victor. Sir Reginald's heart is strong, but stress from such nonsense isn't helpful, sir." Reginald slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal. "Enough. I won't have my home turned into a ghost story for amusement. The painting is silent canvas, nothing more." He rose abruptly, excusing himself to the gallery, where he often retreated to brood among his treasures. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Clara excused herself soon after, retreating to her studio. Victor and Dr. Thorne lingered over cigars, their conversation drifting to safer topics like horse racing. Lady Beatrice, ever the hostess, ensured the staff cleared the table efficiently before retiring to her sitting room. That night, the moon was absent, hidden behind thick clouds that promised rain. The manor settled into quiet, broken only by the tick of clocks and the occasional creak of floorboards. Sir Reginald, unable to sleep, wandered the halls in his dressing gown, a lantern in hand. He paused before the portrait, studying Lady Eliza's face. "What secrets do you hold?" he murmured, tracing the frame with a finger. A draught stirred the curtains, and for a moment he thought he heard a faint whisper like silk brushing against canvas. Shaking his head, he turned away. In the village below, at the Fox and Hound, the last patrons departed. The innkeeper, Mr. Jenkins, locked up, glancing toward the manor silhouetted against the sky. "Another dark night," he muttered to his wife. "Wonder if it'll scream again." Hours passed. The clock in the hall struck midnight, then 1, then 2. Some time after, a sound pierced the stillness, a scream, high and anguished, echoing through the corridors. It lasted only seconds, but seemed eternal, fading into a sob that dissolved into silence. Lady Beatrice sat bolt upright in bed, her heart pounding. Victor, in the guest wing, froze with a deck of cards in hand, practicing solitaire. Clara, sketching by candlelight, dropped her charcoal. Dr. Thorne, reading in his cottage, heard it faintly through the open window and hurried toward the manor. But Sir Reginald did not stir. When morning broke, grey and drizzly, the maid discovered him at the foot of the grand staircase. His body lay crumpled, limbs akimbo, his face contorted in an expression of sheer terror. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, as if the last thing he saw had been horror itself. The news spread through Eldridge Hollow like wildfire. By midday, villagers clustered at the inn, speculating. "The painting did it," Mrs. Wilkins insisted. Cursed him for doubting. Mr. Jenkins nodded sagely. "Heard the scream myself last night, clear as day." Inspector Craddock arrived from the county town, a solid man with a mustache and a nonsense air. He interviewed the household methodically. Lady Beatrice, pale but composed, recounted the evening's events. Reginald seemed agitated after dinner, but that's not unusual. He loved his art dearly, Victor, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands. Admitted to hearing the scream. Woke me from sleep. Thought it was a fox or something at first. Clara, her eyes red-rimmed, spoke softly. "I was working late. It came from the gallery, I'm sure." Dr. Thorne confirmed the time of death around 3 a.m. and suggested a fall down the stairs, perhaps induced by a heart attack. He had a weak constitution, he said, though his voice wavered. The inspector examined the body, noting no obvious wounds, but ordering an autopsy. He ventured to the gallery, standing before the portrait. Lady Eliza gazed back serenely, her smile unchanged. "Odd business," Craddock muttered. "But paintings don't kill." As the day wore on, Lady Beatrice sat in her drawing room, penning a letter. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Dearest Jane, tragedy has struck. Reginald is gone, under circumstances most puzzling. The police are here, but I fear they see only the surface. Your insight into human nature has solved riddles before. Please come." She sealed it, addressing it to Miss Jane Marple of St. Mary Mead. Meanwhile, in the village, gossip evolved. Some recalled Sir Reginald's recent arguments with Victor over money. Others mentioned Clara's frustration with her uncle's dismissal. Of her talent, Dr. Thorne's frequent visits raised eyebrows. Was there more to his loyalty? The autopsy, conducted swiftly, revealed traces of poison in Sir Reginald's system digitalis, enough to stop a heart. Not a fall then, but murder. Inspector Craddock's investigation deepened, questioning alibis and motives. Lady Beatrice posted her letter, watching the postman cycle away. In the gallery, the portrait hung silent, but as evening fell, a villager passing the manor swore he heard a whisper like canvas stirring in the wind. The days following Sir Reginald's death blurred into a haze of inquiries and unease. Blackthorn Manor, once a symbol of genteel isolation, now swarmed with police constables poking into every corner. Inspector Craddock set up a temporary office in the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes that Sir Reginald had collected but seldom read. The inspector was thorough, interviewing servants first, the butler, Mr. Hargreaves, a stoic man in his 50s who had served the family for decades, the cook, Mrs. Ellis, plump and gossipy, and the young maid, Elsie, who trembled as she recounted. Finding the body. It was awful, sir, Elsie said, twisting her apron, his face like he'd seen the devil himself. And that scream in the night. I hid under the covers. Craddock noted her words, cross-referencing with others. The scream was unanimous. Everyone in the house had heard it, though accounts varied on its origin. Lady Beatrice placed it near the staircase, Victor from the upper floors. Clara insisted on the gallery. Victor Hawthorne became the inspector's focus early on. His financial troubles were no secret. Bills from London bookmakers arrived daily, and Sir Reginald had bailed him out more than once. We argued, yes, Victor admitted during his interview, lounging in an armchair with feigned nonchalance, but murder, preposterous. I was in my room all night. Clara's interrogation was gentler, but probing. Your uncle disapproved of your art. Craddock said, that must have stung. She nodded, her fingers ink-stained. He called it drivel. But I loved him, Inspector. Family is family. Dr. Thorne provided medical details, explaining that digitalis was part of Sir Reginald's prescription for his heart, but the dose found was excessive. Someone could have tampered with his medicine, he suggested, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Lady Beatrice maintained her poise, offering tea to the officers and answering questions with quiet precision. Yet, in private moments, she paced the gardens, her mind racing. The letter to Miss Marple was her lifeline. Jane had a way of seeing through facades, much like peeling layers from an onion dot. In Eldridge Hollow, the village buzzed. At the church, Reverend Hargrove preached on the fragility of life, his sermon laced with allusions to curses. Children dared each other to approach the manor's gates, whispering about the screaming lady. Even the postmistress, Mrs. Wilkins, delayed delivering mail to the estate, claiming a chill in the air. As the week progressed, clues emerged subtly. A scratched frame on the portrait, unnoticed at first. A black feather near the staircase, perhaps from a bird or something else. Victor's vague alibi crumbled when a villager saw him walking the grounds late at night. Clara's studio revealed pigments matching those on Lady Eliza's canvas, hinting at unauthorized touches. Dr. Thorne's cottage was searched, yielding nothing but medical texts and a locked drawer that piqued interest. Lady Beatrice's composure slipped once when questioned about her husband's will. She knew it favored Victor with the manor, but the art went to Clara under conditions. The poisoned source remained elusive. Digitalis grew wild in the hedges, accessible to anyone. Motives intertwined. Victor's debts, Clara's inheritance, Thorne's possible affections for Beatrice, hinted at by lingering glances by the week's end. As fog rolled in from the hills, the manor felt heavier with secrets. Lady Beatrice received a telegram from Miss Marple, arriving tomorrow. Hold fast. Relief washed over her. That night, another scream echoed, not as loud but unmistakable. The household stirred, but found nothing amiss. Inspector Craddock, staying overnight, rushed to the gallery. The portrait stared back, silent in St. Mary Mead, far away. Miss Jane Marple folded the telegram, her mind already turning over the puzzle. A painting that screams, she murmured to her knitting. How very intriguing. But back in Eldridge Hollow, the whisper of canvas lingered, promising more revelations in the days to come. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Invitation. The morning after Sir Reginald Hawthorne's death dawned grey and heavy, with a fog so thick it seemed to muffle even the birdsong in Eldridge Hollow. Blackthorn Manor stood like a sentinel amidst the mist, its windows glinting dully as if reluctant to reflect the weak sunlight struggling through the clouds. Inside, the household moved with the cautious tread of those who sense calamity but dare not name it. Lady Beatrice Hawthorne, clad in a sombre grey dress that matched the day, sat at her writing desk in the morning room, her pen poised over a sheet of cream stationery. The letter to Miss Jane Marple had been sent days ago, but urgency gnawed at her. She felt the manor closing in, its walls whispering secrets she could not yet decipher. The room was elegantly appointed, with rosewood furniture and a fireplace where embers glowed faintly. A vase of late blooming roses, their petals curling inward, stood on the mantel. A reminder of Lady Beatrice's meticulous care for the gardens, now neglected in the wake of tragedy. She glanced at the window, where the fog pressed close, and shivered despite the shawl draped over her shoulders. The scream from the previous night lingered in her memory, sharp and unnerving, though no one could agree on its source. Inspector Craddock had dismissed it as nerves, but Beatrice knew better. Something was amiss in Blackthorn Manor, something beyond a mere fall or a heart strained by poison. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Mr. Hargreaves, the butler, entered, his face as impassive as ever, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "A telegram, my lady," he said, presenting it on a silver tray. "From St. Mary Mead." Beatrice's heart lifted. She tore open the envelope, her eyes scanning the brief message. "Arriving tomorrow. Hold fast. Jane Marple." A sigh escaped her, and she tucked the telegram into her sleeve. Jane, with her unassuming air and needle-sharp mind, had unravelled knots before village scandals, a theft at a vicarage, even a murder disguised as accident. If anyone could pierce the fog of Blackthorn Manor's mysteries, it was she. "Thank you, Hargreaves," Beatrice said, her voice steadying. "Please ensure a room is prepared for Miss Marple. The blue guest suite will do." Hargreaves bowed and withdrew, his footsteps silent on the Aubusson carpet. Beatrice turned back to her desk, but her pen remained idle. Her mind wandered to the gallery, to the portrait of Lady Eliza, its enigmatic smile now tinged with menace. She had never believed the village tales, not truly, but Reginald's death, so sudden, so unnatural, had shaken her certainties. Poison. The inspector had said, digitalis, in a dose far beyond what Dr. Thorne prescribed. Who in this house could have done such a thing? Victor, with his debts piling like autumn leaves. Clara, wounded by her uncle's scorn, or someone else, hidden in plain sight. The morning room door opened again, this time without a knock. Victor Hawthorne strode in, his usual swagger tempered by a pallor that suggested sleepless nights. His dark hair was dishevelled, and his cravat hung loosely, as if tied in haste. "Aunt Beatrice," he said, dropping into a chair without invitation, "this place is unbearable. Constables poking about, servants whispering. Can't we send them?" "All packing," Beatrice folded her hands in her lap, her expression serene but her eyes watchful. The police are here to find answers, Victor. Your uncle's death was no accident. Victor snorted, lighting a cigarette with a match struck against the arm of the chair. Accident or not, it's done. Dragging it out only stirs more gossip. That cursed painting, everyone's talking about it now. Mind your language, Beatrice said sharply, and the portrait is no more cursed than this table. Reginald's death was caused by human hands, not spectral ones. Victor exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing. You're quick to defend it. Planning to sell the collection, are you? Clara's sniffing around it already, I wager. Beatrice's lips tightened. Clara is grieving, as we all are. You'd do well to show some respect. Victor shrugged, rising. Respect won't bring him back. I'm off to the inn, a drink to clear my head. He sauntered out, leaving a trail of smoke and tension. Beatrice sat motionless for a moment, then rose and crossed to the window. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing the skeletal outlines of the garden's topiaries. Victor's cavalier attitude grated, but she knew his type charming when it suited, reckless when cornered. She recalled a conversation with Reginald weeks ago, his voice low with frustration. Victor's debts will ruin him, Beatrice. I've half a mind to cut him off. Had that threat pushed Victor to desperation? Her musings were cut short by the arrival of Clara, who entered hesitantly, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. The young woman's face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but there was a spark of determination in her gaze. Aunt Beatrice, may I speak with you? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Of course, my dear. Beatrice gestured to a chair. You look troubled. Clara sat, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchbook. It's the portrait. I went to the gallery this morning before the police sealed it again. There's something wrong with it. The frame's scratched, and the canvas feels ... different. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. Different how? I can't explain it. Like it's been touched, moved. I know it sounds mad, but I feel it, watching me. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. And last night's scream, I swear it came from there. Beatrice reached out, patting Clara's hand. You're overtired, Clara. We all are. The police will sort this out, and my friend Miss Marple arrives tomorrow. She has a knack for seeing what others miss. Clara nodded, though doubt lingered. In her eyes, I hope so. Uncle's death, it's changed everything. As Clara left, Beatrice's gaze drifted to a small portrait on the wall miniature of her and Reginald in their youth. Painted during their engagement, his smile was warm then, unburdened by the weight of legacy. Now, that legacy felt like a noose tightening around them all. By afternoon, Inspector Craddock summoned the household to the drawing room for updates. The room, with its velvet drapes and polished mahogany, felt oppressive despite its grandeur. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his mustache twitching as he spoke. The autopsy confirms poisoning digitalis in a lethal dose. We're tracing its source. Meanwhile, I've questions about last night's single quotes as ... disturbance. Smirked, the scream, probably Elsie dropping a tray. Elsie, hovering near the door, flushed. It wasn't me, sir. It came from upstairs, clear as anything. Dr. Thorne, seated near Clara, adjusted his spectacles. Nerves can amplify sounds, Inspector. The manor's old drafts, creaking beams. I heard it from my cottage, but faintly. Craddock's eyes narrowed. And you, Miss Hawthorne. You were awake, I hear. Clara nodded, her hands clasped tightly. In my studio. It came from the gallery, I'm certain, like someone in pain. The inspector jotted a note. We found nothing amiss in the gallery, but I've sealed it for further inspection. Now, about Sir Reginald's routine, his medicine, his habits. Dr. Thorne, you prescribed the digitalis. Thorne nodded, his fingers drumming on his knee. A low dose for his heart, kept in a vial in his study. I checked it weekly. And who had access to that study? Craddock pressed. Beatrice answered smoothly. Reginald, myself, the servants, for cleaning. It wasn't locked. Craddock's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. Someone in this house knew his habits well. I'll need alibis for the night of the scream, every detail. As the meeting dispersed, Beatrice caught a glance between Victor and Thorne, a fleeting look, too quick to interpret. She filed it away, her mind turning to Jane Marple's arrival. The manor's secrets were like threads in a tapestry, tangled, but not unbreakable. That evening, as the household dined in strained silence, a knock at the door heralded the postman with another telegram. Beatrice read it alone in her room. Delayed by train, arrive noon. Jane, disappointment mingled with resolve. One more night, then as midnight approached, Beatrice sat by her window, the fog now a ghostly veil over the gardens. The manor was quiet, but not at peace. Somewhere in its shadowed halls, the truth waited like a painting watching, silent but knowing. Chapter 3. The first scream. The fog that had cloaked Eldridge Hollow for days began to thin by mid-morning, revealing Blackthorn Manor's stone facade in sharp relief against a sky bruised with clouds. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken questions, the household moving through its routines like actors in a play where the script had gone awry. Lady Beatrice, ever the anchor, supervised the maids with a calm that belied her restless thoughts. The telegram from Miss Jane Marple, promising her arrival at noon, lay folded on her writing desk, a talisman against the growing unease. In the breakfast room, the clink of porcelain was the only sound as Victor Hawthorne. Clara and Dr. Elias Thorne sat around a table laden with uneaten toast and cooling tea. Victor, his eyes shadowed from a night at the Fox and Hound, pushed his plate away. This place is a mausoleum, he muttered, lighting a cigarette despite Beatrice's disapproving glance. Clara, sketching idly on a napkin, said nothing, her pencil tracing the outline of a woman's face that bore an uncanny resemblance to Lady Eliza's portrait. Dr. Thorne, sipping his tea, seemed lost in thought, his fingers twitching as if itching to adjust his spectacles. Beatrice entered her grey dress, rustling softly. Inspector Craddock will return this afternoon, she announced. He wishes to re-examine the gallery. Clara, perhaps you could assist with your knowledge of art. Clara's pencil paused. Of course, Aunt Beatrice. But the portrait, it unsettles me. I can't explain why. Victor snorted. It's just paint and canvas, Clara. You're as bad as the village gossips. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. Grief can play tricks on the mind. We're all on edge. His voice was kind, but his eyes darted to Victor, a flicker of something caution. Perhaps passing over his face, Beatrice changed the subject. Miss Marple arrives soon. I've known her since our school days. She has a remarkable gift for seeing through confusion. Victor raised an eyebrow. A spinster from some sleepy village. What's she going to do? Knit us a solution. Beatrice's lips thinned, but she said nothing. excusing herself to oversee the guest suite's preparations. Clara returned to her napkin, her sketch now a tangle of dark lines. Thorne stood, murmuring about checking his medical bag, while Victor stubbed out his cigarette and sauntered toward the library, claiming a need for a book. The manor's clock struck 11, its chimes echoing through the halls. Outside, the village stirred with its own rhythm, farmers tending fields, children playing near the church, and Mrs. Wilkins at the post office, sorting letters while whispering to a customer about the manor's curse. "Heard it myself last night," she said, her spectacles glinting. "That scream wasn't human." At noon, a carriage rattled up the manor's drive, and Miss Jane Marple stepped out, her figure small but upright, clad in a sensible tweed coat and a hat adorned with a single feather. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, took in the manor's facade as Lady Beatrice greeted her warmly. "Jane, thank you for coming. I fear we're lost without you." Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild but her gaze sharp. "My dear Beatrice, it's only a matter of looking closely. People are much the same, whether in St. Mary, Mead, or here." She carried a small valise and a knitting bag, which Hargreaves took with a bow. Over luncheon in the dining room, Beatrice introduced the household. Victor was late, arriving with a faint whiff of whiskey. Clara offered a shy smile, while Dr. Thorne shook Miss Marple's hand with a nervous grip. The meal was simple cold meats and salad, but the atmosphere was taut. Each glance weighted with suspicion. Miss Marple, buttering a roll, asked lightly, "This portrait I've heard of Lady Eliza, is it? Quite a story in the village." Victor laughed, a harsh sound. "Superstitious rot. It's a painting, not a banshee." Clara's fork clattered. "It's not just stories. I've felt ... something. And the scratches on the frame, they weren't there before." Beatrice's eyes flickered to Miss Marple, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps I might see it after lunch," she suggested. The gallery was a long, high-ceilinged room, its walls lined with paintings of lesser-note landscapes, still lifes, a few door ancestors. At its center hung Lady Eliza's portrait, commanding attention. Her blue eyes seemed to follow the viewer, her smile both serene and secretive. Miss Marple approached slowly, her knitting bag slung over her arm. She studied the canvas, noting the fine brushwork, the rich greens of Eliza's gown, the gold frame marred by faint scratches near the top right corner. "Exquisite," she murmured. "And these scratches, recent I'd wager, the wood beneath is to clean for age." Inspector Craddock, arriving with a constable, joined them. "Miss Marple, is it? Lady Beatrice speaks highly of you. Found anything odd?" "Only what one expects in an old house," she replied, her tone light. "Drafts, shadows, and perhaps a touch of human mischief." Craddock grunted, examining the frame himself. "No sign of tampering beyond this. But that scream last night, everyone heard it. No source found." As they spoke, the clock struck 6, and the manor's lights flickered briefly, a common occurrence in its aging wiring. Then it came a scream, shrill and piercing, rising from nowhere and everywhere, filling the gallery with a sound that clawed at the nerves. It lasted mere seconds, fading into a hollow echo. Clara gasped, clutching Beatrice's arm. Victor swore under his breath, his face paling. Thorne's spectacles slipped, and he fumbled to catch them. Craddock spun, scanning the room, but it was empty save for the paintings. "Where did it come from?" he demanded. Clara pointed at the portrait. "There, I'm sure of it. Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. She ran a finger lightly along the frame's edge, pausing at the scratches. "Curious," she said softly. "Very curious." Ordered the room sealed again, posting a constable at the door. The household dispersed, shaken. Victor muttered about needing a drink and headed for the village. Clara retreated to her studio, her sketchbook trembling in her hands. Thorne offered to check Beatrice's nerves, but she declined, escorting Miss Marple to the drawing room instead, over tea. Beatrice recounted the night of Reginald's death, the dinner, the argument about the portrait, the scream that woke them all. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "And this digitalis," she said, "kept in the study, you say, accessible to many?" Beatrice nodded. "Reginald was careless with it. Anyone could have ... Her voice trailed off. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In my village, we had a case once, a gardener poisoned by his own herbs, or so it seemed. But the truth lay in who handled the teapot." Beatrice frowned. "You think it's that simple? Nothing is simple, my dear. But everything is human." As evening deepened, Miss Marple excused herself to unpack, her mind turning over the screams, timbre human, yet not quite. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a prankster using a hidden phonograph to mimic cries. Could it be so here? And those scratches deliberate, she thought, but why? In the village, Victor sat at the Fox and Hound, his laughter loud but his eyes darting to the door. Mrs. Wilkins, passing by, whispered to the innkeeper, "He's scared, mark my words. That painting's got them all in knots." Back at the manor, Clara sketched furiously, her lines forming Lady Eliza's face again and again. Thorne locked his medical bag, his hands unsteady. Beatrice stood in the garden, staring at the manor's silhouette, while Miss Marple, in her room, opened her knitting bag and smiled. The threads were there, waiting to be woven. Chapter 4. Shadows of Inheritance. The morning light filtered weakly through the mullioned windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors. The fog had lifted, leaving a crisp autumn clarity that made the manor's stone walls seem sharper, almost accusatory, as if they too demanded answers for Sir Reginald Hawthorne's death. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the breakfast room with a cup of tea and her ever-present knitting, observed the household with the quiet attentiveness of a bird watching a garden for worms. Lady Beatrice, impeccable despite her grief, presided over the table, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor as she poured cream. Victor Hawthorne was absent, likely still nursing a headache from the previous night's excesses at the Fox and Hound. Clara, her eyes hollow, picked at a scone, while Dr. Elias Thorne, unusually silent, kept his gaze fixed on his plate. Miss Marple broke the quiet with a gentle question. "Lady Beatrice, you mentioned Sir Reginald's will. Was it recently changed?" Beatrice's cup paused mid-air, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before her composure returned. "Not recently, no. Reginald was meticulous about such matters. The will was drawn up 2 years ago, after a family discussion." Clara's head lifted. Uncle was always clear about the manor going to Victor, but the art collection, that was different. He wanted me to prove myself worthy. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Worthy how, my dear?" Clara hesitated, her fingers crumbling. "The scone. He thought my work too modern, too unrefined. He said if I could restore Lady Eliza's portrait to his satisfaction, the collection would be mine. Otherwise, it would go to a museum." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat, his voice cautious. Sir Reginald was proud of his collection. He saw it as a legacy, not just art, but restoration is delicate work. Clara's skills are more ... experimental. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing, her eyes dropping to her lap. Miss Marple noted the tension, her mind drifting to a case in St. Mary Mead where a disputed will had turned cousins against each other, all for a modest cottage. Inheritance, she knew, could twist even the gentlest hearts. Beatrice rose, smoothing her skirt. "Jane, would you care to walk in the garden? The air might clear our heads." Miss Marple agreed, tucking her knitting into her bag. The gardens of Blackthorn Manor were a marvel, with neatly clipped hedges and roses that, even in late autumn, held a defiant vibrancy. As they strolled, Beatrice's voice lowered. "Reginald's death has stirred old wounds. Victor expected everything Manor collection, all of it. When Reginald favored Clara for the art, Victor was furious. He hid it, but I saw." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning a bed of foxgloves digitalis. She noted their purple bells, swaying gently. "And the poison," she said softly, "could it have come from here?" Beatrice paled. "The gardener grows them for ornament, but surely no one would ... Her voice trailed off, her fingers twisting her shawl. "People do surprising things for what they believe is theirs," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her gaze sharp. "In my village, a man once poisoned his brother over a few acres. Greed is a powerful lens it." They returned to the manor, where Inspector Craddock awaited in the library, his notebook brimming with scribbles. "Miss Marple," he greeted, "your friend speaks highly of your instincts. Care to share any?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair. "Only that people are rarely what they seem, Inspector. But I'm sure you've noticed that." Craddock grunted, turning to Beatrice. "We've traced the digitalis to Sir Reginald's vial, but it was tampered with extra-dose added. Who had access to his study?" Beatrice repeated her earlier answer. Herself, Reginald, the servants, and occasionally Victor or Clara. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "And you, Dr. Thorne, you handled the prescription." Thorne, entering just then, stiffened. "I prepared it carefully, Inspector. The vial was secure in the study when I last checked, 3 days before his death. And you didn't notice it missing." Craddock pressed. Thorne's fingers twitched toward his spectacles. "I had no reason to check daily. Reginald was diligent about his doses." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Dr. Thorne, did Sir Reginald ever mention the portrait's history?" "The screams, perhaps." Thorne hesitated. "He laughed them off, but he was protective of it. Spent hours in the gallery, talking to it, almost I thought it a quirk." Craddock scribbled, then turned to Clara, who had slipped into the room. "Miss Hawthorne, you've been in the gallery often. Notice anything odd beyond those scratches?" Hands clasped tightly. "The canvas feels wrong, Inspector. Like it's been touched, moved. I can't explain it." Victor burst in, his shirt rumpled, a faint flush on his cheeks. "What's this? Another inquisition?" "I was at the inn last night," asked Jenkins. "No one saw me near the study." Raised an eyebrow. "Convenient, but we're checking alibis." "Yours is shaky, Mr. Hawthorne." Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, storming out toward the stables. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind turning over his defensiveness. In St. Mary Mead, a young man with debts had once set a barn ablaze to cover his tracks. Victor, she thought, was not so different. That afternoon, Miss Marple requested a closer look at the gallery. Beatrice led her, with Clara trailing behind. The portrait of Lady Eliza dominated, its colours vivid despite age. Miss Marple examined the scratches again, noting their precision, too deliberate for accident. She tapped the frame gently, listening for hollowness, but found none. Curious, she murmured, her eyes tracing the canvas's edges. Clara lingered, her voice low. I tried to study it yesterday, to understand Uncle's obsession, but it ... watches you, doesn't it? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Paintings often seem to, my dear. It's the artist's skill or perhaps our own imaginations. As they left the gallery, a maid hurried up, her face pale. My lady, Inspector Craddock, found something in the study. A letter, half burned, in the grate. Beatrice and Miss Marple followed her to the study, a masculine room of dark wood and leather-bound books. Craddock held a charred scrap of paper, the ink barely legible. ... Debts must be settled. Regret. The signature was gone, but the handwriting was sharp. Precise and like Victor's scrawl or Clara's looping script. Could be Sir Reginald's, Craddock said, or someone else's. We're testing the ink. Miss Marple peered at the fragment, her mind racing. A warning, perhaps, or a confession. Beatrice's hand trembled. Reginald never mentioned debts beyond Victor's, but he was secretive lately. As evening fell, the manor grew quiet, the household retreating to their corners. Miss Marple sat by the drawing-room fire, knitting, her thoughts weaving patterns. The letter, the scratches, the scream, all threads in a tapestry not yet clear. Victor's anger, Clara's sensitivity, Thorne's nerves. Beatrice's poise, each held a piece of the puzzle. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Miss Marple paused, her needle still. A faint sound reached her, not a scream, but a whisper, like canvas shifting in the dark. She set her knitting down, her eyes bright with purpose. In St. Mary Mead, whispers often led to truths, and Blackthorn Manor, she sensed, was no different. Chapter 5. The artist's secret. The dawn broke over Eldridge Hollow with a reluctant sun, its rays struggling through a veil of clouds that hung low over Blackthorn Manor. The house, with its ivy-clad walls and brooding presence, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, as if guarding its secrets against the day. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, the household moving through breakfast with the mechanical precision of those who dread what the day might reveal. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the table with her knitting bag at her side, sipped her tea and observed the faces around her. Lady Beatrice, her composure a fragile mask, cut her toast into precise squares. Victor, nursing a headache and a scowl, barely touched his coffee. Dr. Thorne, his spectacles polished to a gleam, seemed preoccupied, his fork hovering over an untouched egg. Clara, however, was absent, a fact that drew Miss Marple's quiet attention. "Where is Clara this morning?" she asked, her voice mild as she adjusted her shawl. Beatrice glanced up, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "She's in her studio, I expect. She often works early, especially since ... Well, you know." Victor snorted, pushing his cup aside. "Hiding, more like. All this talk of scratches and screams, she's got herself worked up over nothing." Dr. Thorne frowned. "Grief affects us all differently, Victor. Clara's sensitive. The studio's her refuge." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm that seemed to steady the room. "Art can be a great comfort," she said, her eyes twinkling. "In St. Mary Mead, Our vicar's wife paints watercolors when troubled. It reveals much what one chooses to create. Beatrice nodded, though her expression remained guarded. Clara's talent is undeniable, but Reginald thought it ... unorthodox. They clashed often. Miss Marple set her cup down. Might I visit her studio, Beatrice? A young artist's work can tell us much about her mind. Beatrice hesitated, then agreed. Of course, Jane. I'll take you after breakfast. The studio was in the Manor's attic, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked underfoot. The room was a chaos of creativity canvases propped against walls, jars of brushes spilling over tables, and the sharp scent of turpentine mingling with the mustiness of old wood. Clara stood at an easel, her back to the door, her hands moving swiftly with a palette knife, spreading vibrant reds and blues across a canvas. The painting was abstract, a swirl of jagged shapes that seemed to pulse with emotion. She turned as Beatrice and Miss Marple entered, her face pale but her eyes fierce. Aunt Beatrice, Miss Marple, I didn't expect. I'm sorry. It's a mess up here. No need to apologize, my dear, Miss Marple said, stepping closer to examine a stack of sketches. Your work is quite striking. This one, she lifted a canvas, slashed across with angry black strokes. It speaks of passion, perhaps frustration. Clara's lips trembled. Uncle hated my style, called it a betrayal of tradition. He wanted me to mimic the old masters, like the artist who painted Lady Eliza. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to a table where jars of pigment sat in disarray. She picked up a small pot of ochre, noting its label matched the hue of the scratches on the portrait's frame. You've been studying the portrait closely, haven't you? Clara flushed. I had to, Uncle's will. If I could restore it, the collection would be mine. I've been practicing with his pigments, trying to match Blackwood's technique. Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm. Clara, you never mentioned working on the portrait itself. I didn't touch it, Clara said quickly, her hands twisting together. I only studied it, took samples from the frame to test colors. Those scratches, I don't know how they got there. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. Of course, my dear. Art is a delicate matter. In my village, a young woman once ruined a family heirloom trying to clean it. Good intentions, poor outcome. As they spoke, a faint noise echoed from below, a sharp crack, like glass breaking. Beatrice stiffened. What was that? Clara's eyes widened. The gallery, it's sealed, isn't it? They hurried downstairs, Miss Marple's steps surprisingly brisk for her age. In the gallery, they found Inspector Craddock already there, his constable examining a shattered window pane near the portrait of Lady Eliza. Shards of glass glittered on the floor, and a cold breeze stirred the heavy drapes. What happened? Beatrice demanded. Craddock's mustache twitched. Looks like someone threw something, or something was thrown out. Found this nearby. He held up a black feather, its edges frayed, glinting faintly in the light. Clara gasped. A raven's feather. The village curse, they say it follows death. Miss Marple took the feather, turning it in her fingers. Curious, she said softly. Not quite a raven's, I think. The sheen is wrong dyed, perhaps. She tucked it into her knitting bag, her expression unreadable. Craddock frowned. Dyed or not, it's no accident. Someone's playing games, or covering tracks. Miss Hawthorne, you were up late last night, hear anything? Clara shook her head. I was in my studio, sketching. I didn't hear the scream until ... Well, you know. Beatrice's voice was sharp. Inspector, surely you don't suspect Clara. I suspect everyone until I don't, Craddock said bluntly. We're dusting the glass for prints. Meanwhile, no one touches this room. As they left the gallery, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the portrait. The scratches seemed sharper in the daylight, almost deliberate, like a signature. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, vandalized gravestone, meant to distract from a theft. Distraction, she mused, was a powerful tool. Back in the drawing room, Victor joined them, his mood sour. Heard about the window. More nonsense about that painting, I suppose. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Nonsense often hides truth, Mr. Hawthorne. Tell me, where were you when the glass broke? Victor's eyes narrowed. In the stables, checking the horses. Ask the groom if you don't believe me. I always believe what can be verified, Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but her gaze piercing. Dr. Thorne arrived, summoned by a maid. He examined the scene, his hands unsteady as he adjusted his spectacles. No one was hurt, I hope? He asked, his voice tight. No, Doctor, Craddock said. But I'll need your movements last night. All of you. Thorne nodded. I was in my cottage, reading. Heard the scream faintly, but nothing else. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm as she listened, her mind weaving connections. The feather, the scratches, the broken window wall pieces, but not yet a picture. She recalled a village girl who left feathers to mark her secret meetings innocent, until they weren't. As evening settled, Beatrice invited Miss Marple to her private sitting room. Over sherry, she confided, Clara's so fragile, Jane. Reginald's expectations weighed on her, and Victor, he's desperate for money. I fear this house is tearing us apart. Miss Marple patted her hand. Families are like gardens, Beatrice beautiful, but prone to weeds. We'll find the root of this. Alone in her room that night, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting idle. The manor was silent, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. She thought of the feather, the glass, the screamage, a note in a discordant melody. In St. Mary Mead, such notes had led to a murderous confession. Here, she sensed, the tune was far from finished. Chapter 6. The doctor's dilemma. The air in Blackthorn Manor carried a chill that no fire could dispel, as if the very stones of the house mourned Sir Reginald Hawthorne's death. By mid-morning, the clouds over Eldridge Hollow had parted, revealing a sky of brittle blue, but within the manor, the atmosphere remained oppressive, thickened by suspicion and half-spoken truths. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, observed the household with her usual quiet acuity. Lady Beatrice, pouring tea with a steadiness that seemed practiced, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Victor Hawthorne, unusually subdued, leafed through a newspaper without reading it. Clara, her fingers stained with fresh ink, sat apart, sketching in a small notebook, her movements quick and nervous. Dr. Elias Thorne, however, was absent, a fact that Miss Marple noted with interest. Dr. Thorne hasn't joined us, she remarked, her voice as gentle as the click of her needles. Is he unwell? Beatrice set the teapot down with a faint clink. He mentioned a patient in the village this morning. He'll be back for luncheon, I expect. Victor snorted, folding his paper carelessly. Probably dodging Craddock's questions. Man's jumpy as a cat lately. Clara's pencil paused, her eyes flicking to Victor. He's grieving, like us. You might show some kindness. Kindness. Victor's laugh was sharp. He's got debts to me, Clara. Kindness doesn't pay bills. Beatrice's lips tightened, but she said nothing, offering Miss Marple a biscuit instead. Miss Marple accepted it, her mind turning over Victor's words. Debts, she thought, were as potent a motive as love or jealousy. In St. Mary Mead, a shopkeeper's IOUs had once led to a poisoned bottle of stout. She filed the thought away, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. After breakfast, Miss Marple requested to see the library, where Inspector Craddock had set up his temporary office. The room was a haven of dark wood and leather, its shelves heavy with volumes Sir Reginald had collected more for prestige than pleasure. Craddock stood by a window, his notebook open, his moustache twitching as he reviewed his notes. "Miss Marple," he greeted, "you've a knack for turning up where questions linger. Found anything in that knitting of yours?" She smiled, settling into a chair. "Only patterns, Inspector. But patterns reveal much, don't they? Dr. Thorne, for instance, his absence this morning is curious." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You've noticed that too? He's been cagey. Says he was in his cottage when the window broke last night, but no one can confirm it." Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. "And his connection to Victor debts, I hear." Craddock nodded, flipping a page. "Victor's been lending money to half the county, it seems, including Thorne. Says it's just friendly loans, but I smell pressure. Thorne's medical bag had a vial of digitalis, same as Sir Reginald's. He claims it's standard, but I'm having it tested." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to a portrait above the fireplace, a stern Hawthorne ancestor, less captivating than Lady Eliza, but equally watchful. "A doctor's knowledge is a powerful thing," she said softly. "In my village, a chemist once mixed a fatal dose by mistake, or so he claimed." Craddock grunted, making a note. "I'll have a word with Thorne when he returns. Meanwhile, I'm rechecking alibis for the night of the scream." Miss Marple excused herself, her steps leading her to the garden, where foxgloves nodded in the breeze. She paused, examining their purple bells, her mind on digitalis. A gardener, trimming hedges nearby, tipped his cap. "Morning, miss. Fine day, ain't it?" "Indeed," she replied, her eyes on the plants. "These foxgloves, are they often picked?" The gardener frowned. "Not by me, Miss. Lady Beatrice likes 'em for show, but they're poison. You?" "No, we keep 'em away from the house." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. Poison in the garden, poison in the study, too many paths to the same end. She returned to the manor, intending to speak with Clara, but found Dr. Thorne instead, just arriving in the hall. His coat dusted with road dirt. "Miss Marple," he said, startled, adjusting his spectacles. "I didn't expect has something happened?" "Only the usual questions, Doctor," she said, her tone mild. "Might we talk? I'm curious about Sir Reginald's health." Thorne hesitated, then led her to the drawing room, empty save for a ticking clock. He sat, his hands restless. "Reginald's heart was weak," he began. "Digitalis helped, but he was stubborn, skipped doses sometimes. I checked his vial regularly, and the night he died," Miss Marple's eyes were gentle but unyielding, "I was in my cottage, reading. Heard the scream faintly, but thought it was wind. I didn't come until morning, when Elsie fetched me." Miss Marple's needles paused. "You knew of the portrait's legend, I suppose?" Thorne's fingers twitched. "Reginald's obsession, yes. He'd sit in the gallery, talking to a trembling about family honor. I thought it harmless eccentricity. And Victor's debts to you?" she asked, her voice soft as a breeze. Thorne's face tightened. He lent me money last year, personal matters. I'm repaying him, but it's no secret. Surely you don't think I think only what I see," Miss Marple said, resuming her knitting. "And I see a house full of shadows." Their conversation was cut short by a commotion upstairs. A maid's cry echoed, followed by heavy footsteps. They hurried to the gallery, where Craddock stood, his face grim. The portrait of Lady Eliza now bore a fresh tear, a jagged rip across the lower edge, exposing the canvases with. Clara stood nearby, her hands trembling, a palette knife clutched tightly. "What's this?" Craddock demanded. "Miss Hawthorne, were you here?" Clara shook her head, tears brimming. "I came to check the frame, like you asked. It was like this when I arrived." Beatrice, arriving with Victor, gasped. "Clara, how could you? I didn't." Clara's voice broke. "I'd never harm it." Miss Marple stepped closer. Examining the tear, fresh, she murmured, and deliberate. "See how clean the edges are." She glanced at Thorne, whose cufflinker's silver acorn caught on a nearby chair's upholstery, leaving a thread dangling. Craddock's eyes followed hers. "Dr. Thorne, you were here earlier." Thorne paled, freeing his cufflink. "Only to check the window with your constable." "I didn't touch the painting." Victor smirked. "Clumsy, doctor, or nervous?" Craddock sealed the gallery again, ordering everyone out. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the torn canvas. In St. Mary Mead, a torn curtain had once hidden a stolen brooch damage as misdirection. She tucked the thought away, joining Beatrice for tea. Over scones, Beatrice confided, "Clara's so fragile, Jane, this could break her. And Thornhe's been odd since Reginald's death." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the cufflink, the tear, the debts. "People hide what they fear to show," she said. "But truth has a way of surfacing." That night, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting forgotten. The manor was restless, its secrets stirring like leaves before a storm. A doctor's dilemma, she thought, was not just medical, it was human, and humans, she knew, were rarely as simple as they seemed. Chapter 7. Midnight Confessions. The night draped Blackthorn Manor in a heavy stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of settling timbers and the distant hoot of an owl in Eldridge Hollow's wooded hills. The storm hinted at earlier had held off, leaving the air thick with anticipation, as if the manor itself waited for the next act in its unfolding drama. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the fire in the drawing-room, knitted with a steady rhythm, her eyes half closed, but her mind alert. The torn canvas in the gallery, Dr. Thorne's snagged cufflink, and Victor's barbed remarks about debts swirled in her thoughts, each a thread in a pattern not yet fully woven. Lady Beatrice sat opposite, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale under the soft glow of the lamps. The household had retired early, shaken by the day's discovery in the gallery. Inspector Craddock had left for the village to confer with his superiors, promising to return at dawn with forensic results from the torn canvas and the black feather. Victor had vanished to the stables again, claiming a need for solitude, while Clara had retreated to her studio, her sketchbook her only solace. Dr. Thorne, after a tense exchange with Craddock, had excused himself to his cottage, his partying. Glance at Beatrice, lingering a moment too long. "Jane," Beatrice said suddenly, her voice low, "I can't bear this uncertainty. The portrait, the screams, Reginald's death, it's as if the house itself is turning against us." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting Beatrice's. "Houses don't turn, my dear. People do. In St. Mary Mead, we had a cottage that locals swore was haunted creaks at night, shadows in the windows. Turned out to be a nephew, pilfering silver to settle debts. Beatrice's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. You think it's that simple? A thief in our midst. Not simple, Miss Marple corrected gently, but human. Tell me, Beatrice, what did Reginald fear most before he died? Not the painting, surely. Beatrice hesitated, her fingers twisting the fringe of her shawl. He was, preoccupied. He suspected Clara of something forgery, perhaps. He found a painting in her studio, a copy of one of his lesser works. He thought she was selling fakes to fund her own art. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained mild. Forgery is a serious charge. Did he confront her? Not directly. He told me in confidence, said he'd rewrite the will if she didn't stop. I begged him to talk to her, but he was stubborn. And then, Her voice broke, and she looked away. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. And Victor? His debts were a strain, I gather. Beatrice's face tightened. Reginald bailed him out too many times. He threatened to cut him off, said Victor needed to learn responsibility. They argued the week before he died. Victor stormed out, vowing to prove himself. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a case in her village, a young man, cut from a will, who tampered with a car's brakes. Motives, she knew, often hid in plain sight, dressed as pride or desperation. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp cry from upstairs. Not the piercing scream of the portrait, but a muffled sob, quickly stifled. Beatrice stood, her shawl slipping to the floor. That was Clara. Miss Marple followed, her steps quiet but purposeful. They climbed the narrow staircase to the attic studio, where Clara sat hunched over her easel, tears streaming down her face. Her sketchbook lay open, revealing a frantic drawing of Lady Eliza's portrait. The eyes exaggerated, almost accusing. Clara, my dear, Beatrice said, kneeling beside her. What's wrong? Clara's voice trembled. I heard it again. Now? A scream, softer, like it was inside the walls. I swear, it's her, Aunt Beatrice. She knows. Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room. Inside the walls, you say? Curious, she moved to the wall behind the easel, tapping lightly with her knuckles. The sound was solid at first, then hollow, a faint echo suggesting a cavity. Beatrice, does the manor have secret passages? Beatrice frowned, rising. Not that I know of. Reginald never mentioned any, but this house is old Georgian, with additions. It's possible. Clara wiped her eyes. I used to play hide-and-seek with Victor as children. He'd disappear into places I couldn't find. I thought it was just clever hiding. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Let's see if we can find such a place now. They searched the wall, pressing panels and tugging at moldings. After several minutes, a soft click sounded, and a narrow section of paneling slid aside, revealing a dusty passage barely wide enough for one person. A draught wafted out, carrying the scent of old wood and something metallic. Beatrice gasped. How did we never know? Miss Marple peered into the darkness, her knitting bag clutched tightly. Old houses keep their secrets well. Shall we explore? Beatrice hesitated, but Clara, her curiosity overriding her fear, nodded. They fetched a lantern from the hall, and Miss Marple led the way, her small figure surprisingly steady. The passage twisted downward, its walls rough and unmarked save for faint scratches, as if someone had dragged something heavy. It ended at a small door, locked with a rusted bolt. "We'll need Craddock for this," Beatrice said, her voice unsteady. "It could be dangerous," Miss Marple agreed, and they retreated, sealing the panel behind them. As they descended to the drawing room, Victor appeared, his coat muddied from the stables. "What's all this commotion?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing at Clara's tear-streaked face. "Nothing to concern you," Beatrice said sharply. "Go to bed, Victor." He shrugged, but his gaze lingered on the staircase, as if sensing the discovery. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind on the passage. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden room had once concealed a stolen will. What, she wondered, might this one hide? At midnight, the house grew silent, but Miss Marple, unable to sleep, sat by her window, her knitting idle. She thought of Clara's confession about the forgery, suspicions, Victor's threats, and the passage's metallic scent. Then it came a scream, muffled and distant, as if from deep within the manor's bones. It was no banshee wail, but something mechanical, a sound she'd heard once in a village hall, when a gramophone needle skipped. She rose, slipping on her shawl, and moved silently to the hall. The sound had stopped, but footsteps echoed faintly, retreating toward the gallery. Peering around a corner, she glimpsed a shadow vanishing into the walls, a figure too quick to identify. She returned to her room, her heart steady but her mind racing. The passage, the scream, the shadow pieces of a puzzle, each whispering of intent. By morning, she resolved to tell Craddock of the passage, but not before speaking to Clara again. The girl's fear, she sensed, was not just of the painting, but of something or someone closer to home. Chapter 8. Hidden Passages. The first light of dawn filtered through the lace curtains of Blackthorn Manor, casting a pale glow over the polished floors and antique furnishings. Eldridge Hollow stirred slowly below, the village still wrapped in the hush of early morning, but within the manor, sleep had been fleeting for most. Miss Jane Marple rose early, her mind abuzz with the events of the previous night, the muffled scream, the shadowy figure slipping into the walls, and Clara's tearful revelations about her uncle's suspicions. She dressed quietly, her sensible shoes making no sound as she descended to the drawing room, where embers from the fire still smouldered. Lady Beatrice was already there, stirring a cup of tea with mechanical precision, her face etched with lines of worry that hadn't been so prominent before Reginald's death. "Jane," she said, looking up, "I hardly slept. That passage in Clara's studio, it changes everything." Miss Marple nodded, accepting a cup of tea. "Old houses like this often have their hidden corners, Beatrice. In St. Mary Mead, the vicarage had a priest hole that hid more than just clergy during troubled times, cache of stolen jewels, once." Beatrice's hand trembled slightly. "We must tell Inspector Craddock, but Clarushi's innocent, I'm sure." Reginald's accusations were hasty. Before they could discuss further, Craddock arrived, his boots muddy from the walk up the drive. His mustache bristled with purpose as he entered, nodding to the women. "Early start, ladies. I've results from the lab de tir on the portrait. Was made with a sharp blade, not torn by hand, and the feather dyed, as you thought, Miss Marple, from a quill set, likely." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "A quill set artistic, then, or perhaps a misdirection. But there's more. Inspector, last night we discovered a secret passage in Clara's studio." Craddock's eyebrows rose. "A passage? Show me." They led him to the attic, where Clara, pale but composed, demonstrated the panel's mechanism. Craddock examined the opening, shining a torch into the dusty confines. Runs down toward the gallery, I'd wager. Let's follow it, with Craddock in the lead, followed by Miss Marple, Beatrice, and Clara. They navigated the narrow corridor. Cobwebs brushed their faces, and the air grew mustier, laced with the scent of aged paper. The passage sloped gently, twisting around what must have been the manor's main walls, until it ended at another panel. This one concealed behind the portrait of Lady Eliza in the gallery. Craddock pushed it open carefully, emerging into the sealed room. The portrait swung aside like a door, revealing the hidden entrance. "Clever," he muttered. "Explains how someone could tamper without being seen." Miss Marple stepped through, dusting her skirt. She scanned the passage's end, spotting a small alcove cluttered with forgotten items, a dusty chest, faded fabrics, and a bundle of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon. "Look here," she said, lifting the letters gingerly. "Old correspondence." Beatrice took them, her eyes widening as she read the topmost. "These are from Lady Eliza to a man named Edmund Blackwood, the artist who painted her. They speak of ... an affair. Passionate, forbidden. And the last one, Blackwood threatens exposure unless she pays him." Clara gasped. "Uncle never mentioned this. But the tragedy, the village tales, say Lady Eliza died young, poisoned," they whispered. Miss Marple's gaze was thoughtful. "Poisoned, like Sir Reginald. History echoing, perhaps." Craddock pocketed the letters for evidence. "This affair ended badly. Blackwood vanished after her death, records say. Motive for murder back then, but now, someone using the legend." As they exited the gallery, Victor appeared, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "What's this? Playing explorers?" Craddock confronted him bluntly. "Mr. Hawthorne, you knew about these passages, didn't you?" Clara mentioned childhood games. Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, as kids we found them. Hid sweets, played spies. Haven't used them in years. Why would I now?" "Alibis are thin, sir," Craddock said. "And your debt's Thorne owes you. Reginald threatened to cut you off." Victor's eyes flashed. "I didn't kill him. This house is mine by right, why risk it?" Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "I knew the passage too, Inspector, from my studio end, but I never went through to the gallery. I swear." Craddock eyed her. "Your uncle suspected forgery. Motive there?" Clara paled, but held her ground. "He was wrong. I copied for practice, not to sell." Miss Marple observed the exchange, her mind on the letters. An affair, blackmail, poison patterns repeating across generations. In St. Mary Mead, a similar bundle of letters had exposed a blackmailer posing as a friend. By afternoon, Dr. Thorne joined them in the library, summoned by Craddock. His face was drawn, his fingers fidgeting with a handkerchief. "This passage, it explains the sounds, perhaps. Echoes carrying through the walls. And the vial from your bag," Craddock pressed. "My constable noticed it missing this morning. Digitalis, like the poison used." Thorne's spectacles slipped down his nose. "Missing. I had it last night checked before bed. Someone must have taken it." Victor smirked. "Convenient." "You were near the gallery yesterday," Cufflink snagged. Thorne flushed. "I didn't steal my own vial," Miss Marple interjected softly. "A missing vial suggests planning, Inspector. Not just for murder, but perhaps to frame." The group dispersed, tensions simmering. Miss Marple requested a moment alone in the gallery, where she examined the portraits back through the open panel. Faint markings, initials, E, B scratched into the wood. Blackwood's signature, hidden. That evening, the manor was quiet, no scream piercing the dusk. Beatrice hosted a subdued dinner, the empty chair at the head a stark reminder. Conversation lagged, each mind on the passage's revelations. Victor excused himself early, claiming fatigue. Clara lingered over coffee, her eyes distant. Thorne departed for his cottage, his bag clutched tightly. Miss Marple sat by the fire later, knitting her thoughts on the missing vial. A twist, she mused. Poison vanishing not to kill, but to sow doubt. In her village, a stolen medicine bottle had masked a suicide as murder. Here, the game was more intricate. As night deepened, she heard footsteps in the hall, soft, cautious. Peering out, she saw Thorne returning, slipping toward the study. She followed silently, watching him search a drawer, his face anxious. He found nothing, retreating with a sigh. Miss Marple returned to her room, her suspicions sharpening. The passage hid more than letters, it concealed movements, intense. And the missing vial, a key, perhaps, to unlocking the next layer of deceit. Chapter 9. The feathers clothed. The morning sun pierced the clouds over Eldridge Hollow, casting a rare golden glow across Blackthorn Manor's ivy-clad walls. Inside, the household moved with a quiet unease, the discovery of the secret passage, and the missing vial of digitalis tightening the web of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, sipped tea and watched the faces around her. Lady Beatrice, her hands steady but her eyes shadowed, poured for the others. Victor Hawthorne, unusually subdued, stared out the window, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. Clara, her sketchbook closed for once, sat with her shoulders hunched, as if bracing for a blow. Dr. Elias Thorne, his spectacles slightly askew, seemed to shrink into his seat, his gaze darting to the door. "Another fine day," Miss Marple remarked, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "Yet the manor feels heavy, doesn't it?" Beatrice nodded, setting the teapot down. "It's the waiting, Jane. Inspector Craddock's questions, the passage, the violets, as if we're all suspects." Victor snorted, turning from the window. "We are, Aunt Beatrice. Craddock's sniffing around like a bloodhound. That missing vial, bet it's in someone's pocket, not mine." Clara's voice was soft but firm. "Stop it, Victor. You're not helping. Uncle's gone, and we're tearing each other apart." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. "We're all shaken, Clara, but the vials. Absence from my bag, it's troubling. I swear I secured it." Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to the tension. "In St. Mary Mead, a lost locket once caused such a stir, found in a magpie's nest. Of all places. Things go missing for reasons, Dr. Burr." Her words hung in the air as Hargreaves, the butler, entered with a tray. "Inspector Craddock, my lady," he announced. "He's in the library, requesting Miss Marple and Miss Hawthorne." Beatrice rose, but Miss Marple gestured for Clara to accompany her instead. "Let's see what the inspector has found, my dear," she said, tucking her knitting into her bag. The library was a fortress of books and shadows, its air thick with the scent of old leather. Craddock stood by the desk, holding the black feather Miss Marple had found by the shattered gallery window. "Miss Marple, Miss Hawthorne," he greeted, his moustache twitching. "The labs confirmed this feather's not from a bird-dyed quill, likely from an artist's set. Any thoughts? Miss Marple took the feather, turning it under the light. Indeed, Inspector. The dye is uneven, as if applied hastily. In my village, a painted feather once marked a secret signal childish, until it wasn't. Clara's eyes widened. An artist's quill. I have some in my studio, but I don't use black dye. Uncle kept old quills in the study, though for his ledgers. Craddock's gaze sharpened. We'll check those. Meanwhile, the vial's still missing, and the passage letters mention poison in Lady Eliza's time. Too many coincidences. Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the quill. Coincidences are often clues, Inspector. Clara, might we visit your studio again? Clara agreed, leading them upstairs. The attic studio was as chaotic as before, canvases leaning like silent witnesses. Miss Marple examined a jar of quills, their tips stained with colours, but none black. These are yours, she asked. Clara nodded. Yes, but I haven't dyed any. I prefer natural hues for my work. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, pausing on a small box tucked under a table. She opened it, revealing a collection of old quills, one faintly stained with black dye. These, perhaps, belonged to Sir Reginald. Clara paled. They were. In his study, I borrowed them weeks ago to experiment with ink drawings. I didn't think, ... double quotes. Miss Marple's tone was gentle. No harm in borrowing, my dear. But someone used this quill, I think, to leave a mark. Back in the library, Craddock took the quill for analysis, his expression grim. If it matches the feather, we're closer to intent. Miss Hawthorne, you're sure you didn't dye it? Clara's voice trembled. I swear, Inspector. I'd never miss, Marple interjected softly. Intent can be misread, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, a girl left a painted stone to scare her rival. It was mischief, not malice. Craddock grunted, unconvinced. Mischief or not, someone's playing games. I'm searching the passage again today. As they left the library, Miss Marple caught Victor lingering in the hall, his eyes narrowing at Clara. Found your culprit, Craddock, he called, his tone mocking. Not yet, Craddock replied, but I'm watching everyone. Victor smirked and strode off, leaving Clara shaken. Miss Marple patted her arm. Courage, my dear. Truth hides, but it doesn't run. That afternoon, Craddock and his constable explored the passage, finding only dust and a broken candlestick, its wax fresh. Recent use, Craddock noted, bagging it. Miss Marple, observing from the gallery, thought of a village thief who'd used candlelight to navigate a cellar quit by the Drippings. At dinner, the mood was strained. Beatrice tried to keep conversation light, but Victor's barbs at Clara grew sharper, and Thorne's silence was heavy. Miss Marple watched her mind on the quills die. A distraction, perhaps, like the torn canvas or broken window, but for what purpose? Later, in Beatrice's sitting room, Miss Marple shared her thoughts. The feather points to art, Beatrice. Clara's studio, Reginald's quills. Someone wants us looking there. Beatrice's hands clasped tightly. Clara's no murderer, Jane. She's too gentle. Gentleness can mask fear, Miss Marple said softly, or protect someone else. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting forgotten. The manor was silent, but she sensed movement in its shadows. A faint creak sounded, perhaps the passage panel. She rose, peering into the hall, but saw only darkness. The quill, the passage, the poisonal threads, she thought, leading to a knot yet untied. In St. Mary Mead, a dyed ribbon had once betrayed a jealous heart. Here, the feather whispered of something deeper, plan, a fear, or a desperate act. Chapter 10. A gambler's risked. The afternoon sun dipped low over Eldridge Hollow, casting elongated shadows across Blackthorn Manor's gardens, where the foxgloves swayed like silent sentinels. Inside, the air was charged with a fragile calm, the household navigating the revelations of the feather and the quill with wary glances and hushed voices. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in the drawing-room with her knitting, observed Victor Hawthorne pacing by the window, his usual swagger replaced by a restless energy that spoke of inner turmoil. Lady Beatrice sat nearby, her embroidery needle pausing mid-stitch, while Clara sketched idly on a pad, her lines hesitant. Dr. Thorne had excused himself to tend to a village patient, his departure noted by all. "Victor," Beatrice said finally, her voice cutting through the silence, "you've been like a caged lion all day. What troubles you?" Victor halted, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands. "This infernal waiting, Aunt Beatrice." Craddock's eyes bore into me like I'm the villain in some penny dreadful. "Debts, they sabre. Everyone has debts." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Debts can weigh heavily, Mr. Hawthorne. In St. Mary Mead, a gentleman once wagered his home on a horse. Race lost it all, and more besides." Victor's eyes narrowed, but he sank into a chair, exhaling smoke. "Fine, I'll say it. Uncle lent me money plenty over the years, but..." He threatened to stop, said I needed to stand on my own. We argued, yes, but poison. "I'm no killer." Clara's pencil stopped. "You argued the night before he died, Victor. I heard you in the study, voices raised about money." Victor flushed. "Eavesdropping, Clara." "Yes, we quarrelled. He called me a wastrel, said the manor would go to me only if I reformed. But I left it at that, went to the inn, played cards till dawn." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Cards, you say?" "With whom?" Victor shrugged. "Locals, Jenkins, the innkeeper, and a few farmers. They'll vouch for me." Beatrice's expression softened. "Victor, if it's money you need, no charity, aunt," he snapped, then softened. "I've plans, investments in London. But with Uncle gone, the will's reading is delayed by this mess." The conversation lapsed, but Miss Marple's mind whirred. A gambler's risk. She thought high stakes, bluffing, desperation. In her village, a card sharp had once forged a will to cover his losses. Victor's alibi, if checked, might hold. But alibis could be bought, like rounds at an inn. Inspector Craddock arrived mid-afternoon, his face set in determined lines. He gathered them in the library, where the secret passage's panel stood ajar, a reminder of hidden truths. "Mr. Hawthorne," he began, "we've spoken to Jenkins. You were at the inn, but left earlier, around midnight. Said you needed air. Where did you go?" Victor's cigarette paused. "A walk, Inspector. The grounds, to clear my head. Alone." Craddock's moustache twitched. "Convenient. And Thorne, you owe him money, or he you?" Victor hesitated, glancing at the door as Thorne entered, his medical bag in hand. "It's the other way," Victor admitted. "Thorne borrowed from Miss small sum for his practice. He's been slow repaying." Thorne stiffened, his spectacles glinting. "Blackmail, is that what you imply?" Victor pressed me. "Yes, threatened to tell Reginald unless I persuaded him on the will. But I refused." Victor leaped up. "Liar. You begged for more time, said you'd handle Uncle's medicine too." by silence. The room tensed, Beatrice gasping. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, noting Thorne's flush and Victor's clenched fists. "Gentlemen," she said mildly, "accusations fly like sparks, but sparks can start fires or smokescreens." Craddock intervened, separating them. "Enough. Thorne, your vial's still missing, and Victor, your walk anyone see you?" Victor shook his head. "No, but I heard the scream from outside. Thought it was a fox." Clara's voice was quiet. "I heard it too, from my studio." "But Victor, you were near the gallery window." Victor paled. Coincidence? Miss Marple thought of the broken glass, the feather planted, perhaps, during that walk. A gambler's bluff, risking exposure. To shift blame. As evening fell, Craddock questioned Thorne privately, emerging with a grim nod. He admits the debt, but denies tampering. Says Victor blackmailed him for an alibi. Beatrice confided in Miss Marple by the fire. "Victor's always been reckless, Jane. Gambling runs in the blood. His father lost a fortune at Monte Carlo." Miss Marple nodded. "Risks escalate when the pot grows. But who holds the winning hand?" That night, the scream returned, louder, drawing them to the gallery. There Thorne lay slumped by the portrait, a syringe clutched in his hand, his face ashen but breathing shallow. "Attacked," he gasped as Craddock arrived. From behind didn't see. Miss Marple examined the syringe, empty but smelling. Faintly of digitalis, self-inflicted, she murmured to Craddock. "Or staged." Thorne protested weakly. "No, ... someone wants me silent." Victor, arriving last, stared. "Theatrics, doctor. To pin it on me." Beatrice fainted into Clara's arms, the strain overwhelming. Miss Marple helped revive her, her mind on the syringe matching Thorne's bag. Perhaps a desperate play. As the doctor was tended, Miss Marple slipped to the passage, finding a dropped handkerchief monogrammed VH Victor's, or planted. The gambler's risk, she pondered, might be a double bluff attacking an ally to forge innocence. In St. Mary Mead, a staged robbery had masked a deeper theft. Here, the stakes were life itself. Chapter 11. Letters from the past. The library at Blackthorn Manor held the hush of accumulated knowledge. Its shelves a silent audience to the unfolding revelations. Mid-morning light slanted through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like reluctant witnesses. Miss Jane Marple sat at the heavy oak desk, the bundle of yellowed letters spread before her, their faded ink a testament to passions long cooled. Inspector Craddock paced nearby, his boots muffled on the Persian rug, while Lady Beatrice hovered at the edge of the room, her fingers absently tracing the spine of a leather-bound volume. Victor and Clara had been summoned, standing apart, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Dr. Thorne, recovered from his ordeal, but still pale, leaned against a bookcase, his eyes watchful. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, peering at the delicate script. "These letters are quite illuminating," she said, her voice steady. Lady Eliza's affair with Edmund Blackwood was more than scandalous, ended in betrayal. Here, in this one dated March 1850, Blackwood demands payment, threatening to reveal their liaison to her husband. And this reply from Eliza desperate, pleading for mercy. Beatrice leaned forward, but poison, the village whispers were vague. Jane. Miss Marple turned to the final letter, its edges frayed. Blackwood's last missive hints at it. "Your silence will be insured," he writes, "by means I dare not name, and Eliza's death certificate, if we recall, listed heart failure, but in those days, digitalis overdose was icily mistaken for such. Craddock stopped pacing, mirroring Sir Reginald. Someone's recreating history. Victor crossed his arms. Ancient grudges. Ridiculous. Blackwood's long dead. Clara's voice was faint, but the portrait, he painted it. Maybe he hid something in it. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. A clever thought, my dear. Let's examine it again. They adjourned to the gallery, where the portrait of Lady Eliza gazed down with unchanging serenity. Craddock carefully swung the canvas aside, revealing the passage entrance, but Miss Marple focused on the back of the frame. Her fingers probed the wood, finding a subtle seam. With a gentle press, a small compartment sprang open, releasing a folded parchment yellow with age. Extraordinary, Craddock breathed, unfolding it. A recipe foxglove extract, dosages marked, lethal in excess. Beatrice gasped, hidden all this time. Blackwood must have placed it, there as insurance or revenge. Miss Marple nodded, and someone discovered it, using the knowledge. Against Sir Reginald, eyes turned to Clara, who stepped back. Not me. I studied the portrait for restoration, but I never found this. Craddock's tone hardened. Your sketches, Miss Hawthorne, we found one in your studio with chemical notations, symbols for distillation, extraction matching this recipe. Clara's face drained of color. Those were for pigments. Uncle's old paints used minerals. I was experimenting with formulas to match Blackwood's colors. Not poison. Victor's laugh was harsh. Convenient, Clara. You wanted the collection badly enough. Thorne interjected. She's used chemistry. I've seen her notes. They're harmless. But Craddock shook his head, producing handcuffs. Too many links, Miss Hawthorne. The quill, the passage, now this. You're under arrest for Sir Reginald's murder, Clara's. Protest died as the constable led her away, her eyes pleading with Miss Marple. Beatrice clutched at Craddock's arm. Inspector, surely not. Miss Marple shook her head slowly, her expression thoughtful. Too obvious, my dear Inspector. Remember the village poisoner in St. Mary Mead. She framed her rival with planted evidence recipes, vials all too. Divert attention from her own guilt. Craddock paused. You think it's a frame? I think, Miss Marple said softly, that the past echoes, but the present twists it. Someone knew Clara's habits, her sketches. We must look deeper. As Clara was taken to the village station, the manor fell into a stunned silence. Victor excused himself abruptly, heading for the stables. Thorne offered Beatrice a sedative, his hands steady now. Miss Marple returned to the library, the recipe in hand, her mind piecing together the deliberate misdirections. In her experience, the obvious suspect was rarely the true one. Shadows hid the real hand at play. Chapter 12. The Twist of Fate. The afternoon light filtered through Blackthorn Manor's tall windows, casting a muted glow over the drawing room where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with a quiet rhythm that belied the storm of thoughts in her mind. The arrest of Clara Hawthorne had sent a ripple of shock through the household, leaving Lady Beatrice pale and trembling, Victor sullen, and Dr. Thorne unusually silent. Inspector Craddock, having returned from the village station, stood by the fireplace, his notebook open but his expression troubled. The manor, once a haven of genteel routine, now felt like a stage where each player masked their true role. Beatrice, seated on a velvet settee, clutched a handkerchief, her voice barely above a whisper. Jane, they can't believe Clara did it. She's no murderer. She loved Reginald, despite their quarrels. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her gaze remained sharp. People often see what's presented, Beatrice. In St. Mary Mead, a young wife was accused of theft because her rival left a stolen ring in her sewing basket. Evidence can lie when guided by a clever hand. Craddock grunted, flipping a page. The chemical notes, the quill, her access to the passage. It's compelling, Miss Marple, but I'll admit, it's tidy. Too tidy, perhaps. Miss Marple's needles paused. Exactly, Inspector. A frame requires precision, but also audacity. Someone knew Clara's habits, her sketches, her presence in the gallery. We must ask, who benefits from her disgrace? Victor slouched in an armchair, lit a cigarette, his hands steadier than before. Not me, if that's what you're implying. The manor's mine, will or no will. Clara's inheritance was the art, not my share. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. You were quick to point fingers, Victor, and your debts Reginald's refusal to fund them further made you angry. Victor exhaled smoke, his smirk thin. Angry, yes. Murderous, no. I was at the inn, remember. Jenkins and half the village saw me. Dr. Thorne, entering quietly, adjusted his spectacles. Clara's no killer, Inspector. Her notes were artistic, not criminal. I've used similar compounds in my practice, perfectly innocent. Craddock's gaze hardened. And your missing vial, Doctor, still unaccounted for. And your debt to Victor, pressure enough to act. Thorne flushed, his fingers twitching. I told you, I refused his demands. I'd never harm Reginald. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice gentle but probing. Dr. Thorne, you were fond of Beatrice, weren't you? More than professionally, perhaps. The room stilled. Beatrice's handkerchief froze mid-motion, and Thorne's face reddened. I respected Sir Reginald, he stammered. My feelings for Lady Beatrice were private, but never improper. Beatrice rose, her composure cracking. Jane, what are you suggesting? Only what the heart reveals, Miss Marple said softly. In my village, a doctor's devotion led him to conceal a patient's crime out of love, not malice. Craddock scribbled a note, but before he could press further, Beatrice spoke, her voice low. Jane, there's something I must tell you alone. They retired to Beatrice's sitting room, a cozy space adorned with her watercolors and a single photograph of her and Reginald in happier days. Beatrice closed the door, her hands trembling. Reginald wasn't just protective of the portrait, he was obsessed. Years ago, he showed me a mechanism behind it, a clockwork device he'd installed. As a jest, it played a wailing sound on moonless nights to amuse guests. He swore it was harmless, but I think someone tampered with it. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. Tampered, to mimic the screams. Beatrice nodded. The night he died, the scream was different, harsher, more human. And since then, it's changed again, as if someone added a recording, not clockwork. Miss Marple leaned forward. A gramophone, perhaps, hidden in the passage. In St. Mary Mead, a choir boy used one to scare his sister childish, until it wasn't. Who knew of this device? Only Reginald and I, Beatrice said. But Victor played in the passages. As a boy he might have found it. Or Clara, studying. The portrait. Miss Marple's mind raced. A mechanical scream, altered to incriminate, clever, but risky. The will's terms, the passage, the vial all pointed to a plan to shift blame, perhaps to Clara, perhaps to obscure a deeper truth. That evening, Craddock returned with news. The vial was found in the garden, buried near the foxgloves, its label smudged but intact. "No prints," he said, "but it's Thorne's. And Clara's sketches, those chemical notes match the poison recipe exactly." Beatrice gasped, but Miss Marple shook her head. "Planted, Inspector. The vial, the notes, the quill, all too perfect. Someone wants Clara out of the way, but why?" Victor, overhearing, smirked. "To get the art, obviously. With Clara gone, it goes to a museum. More, maybe me, if I contest the will." Thorne's voice was sharp. "You'd contest it, after all you've taken?" The argument escalated until Craddock silenced them. Miss Marple, watching, noted Victor's calm beneath his blustered gambler's poise, betting on chaos. She recalled a St. Mary Mead card game where a player faked a loss to win bigger later. Alone with Beatrice, Miss Marple mused, "The scream's change is key, Beatrice. A recording suggests intent not just to kill, but to terrify. And terror points fingers." Beatrice's eyes filled. "I altered the will, Jane, secretly. After Reginald suspected Clara, I made it harder for her to inherit, to protect her from his wrath. Did I cause this?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "You meant well, my dear, but secrets breed shadows." That night, no scream sounded, but the manor felt alive with whispers, creaks, footsteps, the rustle of unseen movement. Miss Marple, sleepless, sat by her window, her knitting idle. The twist, she sensed, lay not in the painting, but in the hearts it watched, jealousy, love, or greed, masked by a mechanical cry. Chapter 13. Unmasking the shadow. The gallery of Blackthorn Manor loomed under the evening's dim light. The portrait of Lady Eliza, presiding like a judge over the assembled group. Miss Jane Marple stood before it, her small figure commanding the room with quiet authority, her knitting bag at her feet. Inspector Craddock flanked her, his notebook poised, while Lady Beatrice sat rigidly on a velvet bench, her face a mask of controlled emotion. Victor Hawthorne leaned against a pillar, his cigarette smouldering, forgotten, in his hand. Dr. Elias Thorne hovered near Beatrice, his spectacles reflecting the candle flames that flickered in the wall sconces. Clara, released on provisional bail, clutched her aunt's arm, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. Miss Marple cleared her throat, her voice calm but carrying. "We've unraveled quite the web, haven't we? Screams from canvas, poison from the past, shadows in passages. But let's begin with the screams mechanical at first. A clockwork prank by Sir Reginald, but later altered. A gramophone, hidden in the passage alcove, triggered by a simple timer and playing a recorded wail. Not spectral, but human invention." Craddock nodded, producing a small, dusty phonograph from his bag. "Found it this afternoon, behind the panel." The recorder woman's cry looped. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Reginald's device. But who changed it? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Someone who knew the manners, secrets intimately. The black feather-dyed quill from Thorne's collection of curios gathered during his travels. A misdirection, like the broken window and torn canvas, to evoke the curse and divert us. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. "My collection, I keep it locked in my cottage." "Locked, but not impenetrable," Miss Marple said. Now, the poison digitalis, mirroring Lady Eliza's fate, drawn from that hidden recipe. "Victor, your debts were dire, weren't they? Reginald's refusal to bail you out pushed you to tamper with his vial, slipping extra doses during your late-night arguments." Victor's cigarette dropped, his face paling. Lies. I was at the inn. Your alibi holds for the inn, but not the walk back, Miss Marple interjected. You slipped in through the passage, administered the fatal dose, then staged the fall, but here's the twist. Beatrice discovered your plot. Beatrice gasped, her composure shattering. Jane, how Miss Marple continued gently. You altered the will in secret, Beatrice, making Clara's inheritance conditional to protect her from Reginald's suspicions. But when you overheard Victor's threats, you acted not to kill, but to expose. You tampered with the gramophone, adding the recording to draw attention, hoping the curse would implicate Victor and force a confession. Victor sneered. Aunt Beatrice. She wouldn't. She would, for the family, Miss Marple said. But the ultimate revelation lies with Dr. Thorne, in love with Beatrice for years. You aided her, Thorne supplying the vial for planting, injecting yourself with a harmless sedative to feign attack, creating an alibi while shifting blame. Thorne's spectacles slipped as he stepped back. Absurd. My feelings are honorable, but I'd never miss. Marple's gaze was steady. Your cottage holds the Kia love letter to Beatrice, hidden in your medical texts, and residue of the recording. Wax on your phonograph. You recorded the scream yourself, using a village actress paid discreetly, all to protect Beatrice, whom you hoped to win once Victor was exposed. Beatrice's tears flowed. Elias, ... You did this for me. Thorne bowed his head. I loved you too much to see you suffer. Reginald's cruelty, Victor's greed, I thought it justice. Craddock snapped handcuffs on Thorne. Aiding and abetting, doctor, and Beatrice accessory after the fact. Beatrice rose, her voice breaking. I only wanted truth, Inspector. Victor's guilt, but Elias twisted it. Miss Marple sighed. Love twists many paths, my dear. In St. Mary Mead, a suitor forged letters to win a widow tragic, but human. As Thorne and Beatrice were led away, Victor slumped, his victory hollow. I didn't mean for this, he muttered, but Craddock arrested him too, for the murder. At the core, Clara, freed, stared at the portrait. All for a painting, ... Miss Marple patted her hand. Not the painting, my dear, the shadows it cast on hearts. Chapter 14. Echoes fading. The dawn broke over Eldridge Hollow with a gentle clarity, the sun's rays slipping through the mist to touch Blackthorn Manor's weathered stones. Inside, the air felt lighter, as if the house itself exhaled after the revelations that had unmasked its secrets. Miss Jane Marple stood in the gallery, her small figure framed by the tall windows, her eyes fixed on the portrait of Lady Eliza Hawthorne. The painting, its canvas now mended by a skilled restorer, gazed back with that enigmatic smile, no longer a harbinger of screams, but a silent witness to human folly. The gramophone, the quill, the viol had been catalogued by Inspector Craddock, their roles in the tragedy laid bare. In the drawing room, Clara Hawthorne sat alone, her sketchbook open to a new page, her pencil tracing the outline of a rose. From the manor's garden, the weight of her uncle's death and the arrests of Victor for murder, Lady Beatrice for her complicity, and Dr. Thorne for his misguided devotion, had left her subdued but resolute. The art collection, now hers under the terms of the will, was a bittersweet inheritance, one she vowed to honor through restoration, not replication. Miss Marple entered, her knitting bag slung over her arm, her expression soft but observant. You're sketching again, my dear, she said, settling into a chair. A good sign. Clara's lips curved faintly. It's all I have left, Miss Marple. The paintings, they're not cursed, are they? Just ... mirrors, of what we bring to them. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Precisely. In St. Mary Mead, a mirror once reflected a thief's guilt. Cracked it. He did, trying to hide his face. But truth reflects, always. Clara set her pencil down. Aunt Beatrice, I can't believe she helped Dr. Thorne, even to expose Victor. And Victor, ... I never thought him capable of murder. Greed twists the heart, Miss Marple said, gently. Victor saw the manor as his salvation from debt, but it trapped him. Beatrice's love for the family, thorns for her itch, a thread in the same knot. Inspector Craddock joined them, his moustache less bristly now, his notebook tucked away. Miss Marple, you've a knack for untangling messes. The case is closed. Victor's confessed to dosing Sir Reginald's vial, hoping to inherit before. The will changed. Beatrice admitted to altering the gramophone, and Thorne to staging his attack, all for their own reasons. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. Reasons are human, Inspector. Love, greed, fear, they weave the tightest nets. Craddock tipped his hat. I'll be off, then. The village is quieter. Now no more talk of curses. As he left, Clara rose, crossing to the window. The manor feels empty without them. But I'll still restore the collection, make it mine. Miss Marple smiled. A fine plan, my dear. Art heals, in its way. Later, as Miss Marple packed her valise, Beatrice's confession echoed in her mind. Torrent of regret poured out as Craddock led her away. She'd meant to save Clara, to expose Victor, but her alliance with Thorne had spiraled into tragedy. Thorne's love, Victor's greed. Clara's innocent soul had collided under the watchful eyes of Lady Eliza's portrait in the hall. Hargreaves, the butler, carried Miss Marple's bag to the waiting carriage. You've done us a service, miss, he said, his stoic face softening. The house feels itself again. Miss Marple inclined her head. Houses are only as troubled as their people, Mr. Hargreaves. The carriage rolled down the drive, past the foxgloves now trimmed back by the gardener. Eldridge Hollow receded, its cottages, and, in returning to their quiet rhythms, at the Fox and Hound, Mrs. Wilkins no longer whispered of curses, though her tales now centered on Miss Marple's uncanny insight, back in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple unpacked her knitting, settling by her cottage window. The village was peaceful, its own dramas small but no less human. She thought of Blackthorn Manor, of Lady Eliza's smile, and murmured, human nature so predictable, yet full of surprises. The needles resumed their rhythm, weaving patterns, as intricate as the truths she'd unraveled, while the echoes of screams faded into memory, leaving only the soft hum of a village at rest.